The Hyde campaign. We're running a war game campaign using the advice presented in Henry Hyde's Wargaming campaigns. And as is so often the case when it comes to warfare, either in the real world or on the tabletop, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. In our case, the enemy is our own hubris combined with the vagaries of chance and fortune. We have opted for a modern-day wargaming campaign, which is way outside your humble host's bailiwick. The campaign preparation went fairly smoothly. We have a map. So here's a nice mountain chain with a river that drains this whole area through a pass, and then you've got a nice big lake here that drains down to a bay on the ocean. A little bit of mountains, some forests, and then a road network, right? Easy peasy. But it's a modern-day wargaming campaign, and unfortunately, I don't even have any figures. So this is largely going to be an exercise on paper. A little different. Not only that, but because it's an unfamiliar era in which we are doing some rather different and new to me things, we're going a little bit slower. In the campaign, I was hoping to do one-to-one time. That was my strategy. That was my plan. Oh, no. This war will be really easy. This campaign will be really easy to fight. And then, smack, it turns out I don't have the rules. I don't have the background or the education. I don't know how I'm going to do it. So I got to take a step back and do a little research. And we're going to advance things along for right now. Critical thing to understand is that these are two, relatively poor nations. This is a planet that has only been around it's only been colonized for 100, maybe 200 years, something like that. Long enough for this area to be settled and for people to start developing their own cultures and for there to be a civil war. And so the two nations, this is Septemtria and Osterregnum, now have their own personalities. And at the start of our politics, the two nations thought they were going to unite and be reunited once again. And unfortunately, because of the politics in each of these countries, and it's just not going to happen. And the interesting thing here is that we allow the politics to drive the conflict. Both of these nations have two competing political factions, one of which is all about the war, and one of which is pretty meh. The big difference is that so they're both kind of split. They're both like only 55-45 in support of the war. The guys in the South are led by essentially a dictator. He's unpopular. He's a repressive leader. His name is Mr. Rastin. And the guys in the North are led by, well, it's a little complicated because what really happened is the guys in the North were led by Chief Schneider. And he went down on the 4th of July to have some lovely peace talks, which was technically illegal, but it's the kind of thing that happens all the time. It isn't enforced until the rival faction, led by Director Merg, was able to effectively stage a coup. So the leader is down here, and when the leader of the North stages a coup, when Merg does that, the leader of the South essentially arrests the legitimate ruler of the North and says, he's under protection. Don't worry, we're going to take care of you. We're going to help put you back in the big leather chair. These are kind of like corporatocracies. What he's really doing is trying to grab the silver mines because the northern nation is a lot wealthier than the southern nation. They've got a lot more resources, but because the southern nation was prepared for this eventuality, they were able to get a jump on the forces of the north, and that's kind of where we start. A lot of political shenanigans going on around that holiday weekend, pretty typical if you look at history. That's a great time. Everybody's distracted with the celebrations, and if you're not, you can achieve your goals. So the forces of Shevlinton launch off and they run up here. They grab this rail junction. They dispatch a company of gendarmes to go over here and secure so we have one company that's taking over the mining town. When the hostilities are opened, of course, because they were a little better prepared, the guys in the South are going to be able to mobilize a little bit quicker. Both teams, I just hope both teams go out there and have fun on the field, have basically one division of armed forces ready to go. Of course, the active division for Osterregnum is now invaded the territory. And maybe they can make this rail line the new frontier. Maybe they can build a fort here and control this choke point between Town 4 and Town 8. By the way, that's how big they are. The larger the number, the larger the village. And the expansionist South can carve off a big chunk of territory, including some fertile agricultural land and, of course, the all-important silver mines. Now, that's important because it means that we have an objective for this war. The stated objective is to return the leader of the North to the big leather chair, but the real goal is to break off this and maybe even just steal a couple of loads of silver and get enough money to fund the next war. I said divisions, I meant regiments. Not a whole lot of people here. These major cities only have like 500,000 people, maybe 1 million tops, I think we decided. Now, the guys in the North are going to be able to call up a total of 5 regiments to 4 for the guys in the South. But of course, the guys in the South have the initiative. And here's where things get interesting. So this regiment of the Southern forces, the Regnan, this is called the Shevlinton, because that's where it came out of. They are backed up by a couple of medium tanks. So that's who is in a defensive position right here. The Captain Hook Regiment from the north, that's the name of the capital, Captain Hook, for the captain that discovered the planet and made first landing there. They're on their way down. Now, as far as everything is concerned, it takes until the 12th of July to secure the silver mines and this town. We still need to determine whether this town is going to take it or if we're going to go full partisan. Are we going to go full Space Wolverines or not? And this is where things wind up on the 12th. Now, as you can see, they still control the crossing here. It could be a contested crossing because the riverine boats are a thing. The North has a few of them up here. They have a couple of ocean-going vessels that they'll have to convert for riverine warfare. They have to lighten the load, change the, get better maps, train up the captains, let them know what's going on. Whereas the guys in the South, I think, if memory serves, let me just double check that. The Septemtrians have one riverine squadron. No, they both have one to start off with. And then, I know what it is. The Septemtria has 3 lake squadrons. That's right. The Osterregnums have 1 squadron of riverine, so they control this traffic, and of course they control the mouth of the river here. But the guys in the north, they can convert those ships. So they start off with 1 riverine squadron, and I think, did they start off with 1? I think that's it. And then as the campaign goes on, they will develop more lake squadrons, which will allow them to kind of bypass that. There's a big swamp over here too, by the way. The dark lines are rail lines. The dashed lines are highways. And of course, highways follow the railroads too. But the point is you can move troops and material a lot faster via rail than you can over land or even over these dashed lines. In addition to these 2 regiments, the guys in the South will call up the Frugaford Regiment. They arrive on the 12th. That's the very day that these mines are seized. Along with the Frugaford Regiment, they will get 2 battalions of Beast Cavalry, which we should see before the end of the video, how that will be able to stiffen up the resolve. And of course, they can move faster. So they may be able to get over here and screen some advances. On the other side of the ticket, but that's the only reinforcements they get for the next 2 weeks. The Black Tree boys are going to come online on August 3rd. And what's the other one? What is this? Fluid Harbor, that's what it's called. Another regiment will spawn here, if you will. On the other side of the ledger, we've got a mechanized infantry battalion, along with a full regiment that will appear over here in Hethwell City. We've got a regiment that will appear up here in PD. I can't remember what PD stands for. That's embarrassing. And then another regiment here. So a total of 5 altogether. And not only that, but the boys up north, they spent a lot of their money on additional air support. So everybody starts out with 1 air squadron. It's going to be kind of neutral. It's going to be one of those things where in the start of the war, they're just going to kind of balance out. There are rules in the rule book that we're going to be looking at here shortly for air combat. We'll have to take a look at that. But I just wanted to give you guys the lay of the land, kind of refresh. It's been a few weeks since we've seen that. And I should point out that because I'm so new at this, I'm using just kind of a very simplified order of battle. We're fighting at the regiment level, and regiments are composed of battalions. In this case, 3. Well, and each battalion has 3 companies, and that's going to be really important because our maneuver element is at the battalion level, and we need to establish what the terrain looks like in this general vicinity. Now, the ground scale of this map is 1 inch equals 40 miles. Alternatively, 1 centimeter equals 25 kilometers. That may be important because of the rule set we're using. Let's now take a look at how that rule set works, and then we can really zoom in and find out how big an area we need to look at. Because this is, if you look, man, if you're looking at this area here, that is 50 kilometers. That's 30 miles across right there. So this could get a little awkward, and maybe as an experiment this will be a failure, but I don't think so. We're going to find a way to power our way through. While I'm grabbing my rule books, I just thank you guys for all of your suggestions and your helpful advice, and particularly those of you that are much better versed in this era and scale of warfare. Now, we'll start out with Hell and Fateful Decisions by Jim Webster. Let's see if we can get a little more light on there. Jim Webster is an interesting guy. He writes these, they're almost, I think he actually points it out in one of his books, they're almost like journal entries with war game rules sprinkled throughout, but they're interesting. They'll change the way you think about miniature wargaming. I started with Hell and Fateful Decisions because this was... Well, here we go. Place the player in the position of battalion commander. I thought, that would be a good set of rules because that's kind of the scale I'm looking for here. I want my maneuver elements to be much bigger. And in this case, the maneuver elements wind up being companies. That's the next step down, okay? That doesn't quite work for what we're doing here. If you're going with companies, did I get that right? The regiment, the battalion, and then the... Yeah, the company's a little too much, right? So your battalion commander, companies, that scale doesn't quite work. The other thing that's a little odd is because it's putting you in the position of battalion commander, you're starting to worry about some things like, where is it? You're not paid to worry about the positioning of squad automatic weapons and the handling of platoon assets. That's below the resolution that you're interested in. It's just too small. However, you do have to worry about things like positioning of tanks. And I'm like, man, and you're a lot of things that just didn't quite work for me. But it was a valuable read just to kind of step up from my usual. Normally, I'm maybe platoons are the maneuver element that I'm interested in. In a game like Epic 40K, the platoon, each of those little stands is basically a platoon's worth of strength points. Each of those tanks that you see on the ground actually represent 2 or 3 Lehman Russes or Chimeras or whatever. So no, I need to zoom out a little bit further. I don't want to be battalion commander. I need to be the regimental commander, and that's where Hell in Microcosm comes in. Interesting blend. Trenches to the stars. Look at it. See? Very clever. The basic maneuver element here is the battalion. All right, great. So now we can go back to our planned scale. And in our case, we are going to have our first combat is going to be 1 regiment versus 1 regiment. That means we're going to wind up having about 3 battalions on 3 battalions. And then they each have some support companies. They'll have to figure out how those fit in. Now, here's what I really wanted to key in on. The ground scale is typically going to be 1 centimeter is 100 meters, and then 10 centimeters is a kilometer. So if we have a battlefield, well, this here is a 30 centimeter ruler. So this is going to be about 3 kilometers across. And if you were using, and my intention is to just map things out on an 11 by 17 piece of paper. Conveniently enough, 2 pages of a rule book are 11 by 17. So that being the case, we're looking at a battlefield that is, well, 30 by, actually, I don't think this is 8.5 by 11. Is this some kind of, I think Jim's one of those like A4 guys. Gross. Close enough. 30 by, 30 by about 45. That means we're only looking at, what did we say? 10 centimeters is a kilometer? 3 kilometers by, well, that's not going to work for me, is it? I mean, we look at this. We've got, I showed you this railhead, that much space is like 50 kilometers. I need to fit at least that much space on my table. So I think we're going to have to wind up cutting that down by half in order to give ourselves a reasonable amount of space. And we're justified. We don't have any miniatures. Now, if you are using miniatures with this rule set, hey, that's no problem. Use a piece of card 5 centimeters by 4 centimeters. Play on a 4 by 8 table. Well, a 4 foot by 8 foot table. Well, that's just completely outside the bounds for us. Instead, we are going to zoom way out, and 1 centimeter is going to equal 2 kilometers. Why are we doing that? And the answer is this piece of card at 5 by 4 centimeters, that gives you a company. So this is the movement tray that we would be using. Okay, and what happens is when you scale all of this, this battalion winds up having a half a centimeter or 5 millimeter frontage. We have a lot of wide open space that's wide open for maneuvering, and we're going to take full advantage of that. That's basically what I'm getting at here. So, but because we're doing that, we're also going to change the ground scale. We're going to reduce this by about 4. We're going to make each turn an hour. So when we do our battle, again, I don't have to worry about things to the nearest 100 meters. I'm the regimental commander. I just need to get things down to the nearest couple of miles. Now, I will point out that to cover this much space, we talked about this in the last video, to cover this much territory would normally require multiple divisions. We don't have those available to us. This is the Wild West. This is, as I said, it's a frontier planet. So we're kind of skating here. We're kind of on dangerously thin ice, and maybe it won't work. That's okay. Now, movement in this game, for a long time, it's really interesting. He really dives in. Jim, when I say he, pronouns are not your friend, Jim, he actually does some really interesting things with like movement and orders, but it's a little hard to follow, right? We got a sequence of play. Side A issues orders, changes orders. Wait a minute, you issue and then change and then move? Then you conduct reconnaissance by fire. Then you do long-range fire. Then you do close combat. Now, bear in mind, close combat means you gotta adjust your expectations here. And this is part of why I'm struggling with this. Close combat means a firefight. These guys might be 300 separated by 300 meters, 200 meters. A little bit less, obviously it's going to be less if you're in an urban environment, but where we are, that's close combat. That kind of like close assault, that's what we're talking about when we talk about melee. It's a little bit different. And then you have, so this is a little interesting. So each of our battalions, he uses your regular 6 millimeter bases. He uses 3 rifle bases and 1 HQ base. That's his battalion. So in other words, each of these bases is going to be a platoon plus the headquarters platoon, right? And then for a battalion, use 3 rifle companies and an HQ and a heavy weapons company base. All right, so what are we talking about here? And then the other interesting thing is the unit modes. You're not worried about whether a unit is in, an echelon, if it's in column attack, if it's lined up. You're not giving your orders that way. You're telling your company commanders, hey, A company, go seize that hill. B company, you're in reserve. C company, because I don't know, you're tired or you boys were out drinking last night. C company, go seize that bridge, right? D company, you're in the center and you just have to hold while these other 2 guys and maybe ready reserve. So the way this game works, and this is really interesting, you're going to issue these orders. And your units have these modes. They may be in hasty attack, deployed battle, prepared attack. Now it takes time to prepare to attack. Don't worry about this. This is just how you represent it with your miniatures, which we don't need to worry about. So what happens is, and it's probably best to talk about this in terms of an example. If I have a unit that is, these 2 forces are moving towards each other. In fact, I've given them orders. Your orders are advance to the north until you make contact with the enemy and then dig in. Alternatively, the orders might be hold your ground. And then, at a given time, that's when you are going to counterattack. And even your company commanders may make that choice. They may go full Little Round Top, right? Hey, I know we're supposed to hold Little Round Top, but they're battered and I'm switching to attack. And so that's where these modes come into play. And which mode they're in, MODE, will determine how they behave. And in order to get them into and out of these modes, you have to issue orders, or you have to roll against their, like, it's basically like in other games it would be considered an initiative. So I will order my boys to advance until they make contact and then hold. And so what happens is they'll be in travel mode, long single wide strip, until they make contact, and then they will shift to hasty defense. If I have seized a piece of ground and I really want to hold it, I may just tell them make a prepared defense. Okay. This is interesting. This is weird because we haven't even really talked about movement yet, have we? So here we have an example. It takes one turn to go from travel mode to hasty attack. So I may say, move into the outskirts of the town and then attack it. Okay, well, I'm going to move to it, and then I have to take a turn to go to hasty attack. All right, and in that turn, I'm a little bit more vulnerable, but at least I'll be able to be more effective on the attack. If I hold still, then I can go from hasty attack. So I can go to hasty attack, but I'm not moving now. My hasty attack fails. I can take a little bit more time, and I can go on to prepared attack. Right? So this is really interesting because you can advance, and then we blundered into the enemy, and now we have to spend one turn ineffective. We switch to hasty attack, and then if we haven't moved and we've taken a little more time, our engineers are brought up to the fore. We've got we take a little bit more time to plan out and coordinate between our platoons. We give our platoon commanders a little bit of time to figure out which squad is going where. Then you can have a more effective attack. So it's really based on the tactics on the ground scale, but on that company scale, and not so much us just pointing and going attack there. There is a rule up here, changing orders and modes, which is interesting. When you do change the mode by rolling, you have changed the orders, and new written orders must be supplied. And so if you can give your orders in 7 words, hold until relieved. Hold until relieved. Hey, it's just a normal roll. But if your orders are something along the lines of, attack on the northern flank until you reach the town square, and then that's a lot of words. You don't have time to issue those, and it gets more complicated. Or if it's attack until noon and then hold the rest of the day, you could probably pare that down to 15 words, in which case you have a penalty to that roll. Kind of an interesting concept. I like that. You also have this ability to stiffen, and this is where the orders of battle come into play, where you say to a battalion, each of our regiments has a company of, let me just flip to the page, we've got a company of tube artillery. We've got those 2 tanks. So we can throw those tanks wherever we need to, but we're only going to be able to support one, because it's just the medium tank, we're only going to be able to support one of those companies. They can't be everywhere all at the same time. We do have 9 companies we have to pick. Who's going to be stiffened? And of course, we want to use those tanks to support the tip of our spear, right? We want to send them in with infantry support for reasons we should all know. Likewise with a heavy weapon. Now, a battalion has these attached, and we're assuming that each company has some limited amount of ability to support with artillery and vehicles. Right, so now finally we get to the point where, one company has a frontage of 5 centimeters. We're going to use a half centimeter. Oh, look, we cut it by 1/10. That's fine. Another interesting thing, when you are engaged in hasty or prepared attack, your minimum frontage is 10 centimeters. Oh, okay, so we can expand that to 1 centimeter. I think we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on defense. But then, when moving, and this is something I hinted at earlier, a battalion is a single line of vehicles the length of its component company. So you got all your little 4x5 cards down, you line them up, and when they move, they accordion outwards, right? When stationary, a company is a single line of vehicles 4 centimeters long. But that gets a lot longer when they're actually on the move, because when you're moving this much material, we are now talking about, for a battalion, we're talking about, 1,500 men? It's like any other convoy. It's going to stretch out when they're on the move, and then when the lead element stops, everybody will catch up. So it's a lot smaller when it's stationary. Interesting. You don't really think about that in most miniature war games. So the other thing is move speeds. Vehicles exhibit that accordingly. Yeah, right. So they have an average speed of 32, 8 kilometers per move. Well, that means in our case, we're really doing things at a very high level. 8 kilometers per move, man, that isn't even, what did we say? One centimeter is 25 kilometers. It's going to take 3 moves to move 1 centimeter. And then we may need to dial in and just kind of like expand that as the forces get closer. Cavalry, 3 kilometers per move. Yeah, we may need to reconsider this. Oh, no, right, because our battlefield is not on that 25 kilometer scale. It's on the, what did we say? I wish you could see my notes. I mean, you could, but I'm not going to show you because I'm embarrassed. They're really disorganized right now. Right, so at 1 centimeter, right, so what 1 centimeter is 2 kilometers we were going to go with. That means cavalry can only move 1 centimeter per move. Okay, and remember, this is 30 centimeters to get across. So it's going to take 15 moves to get across the table. Whereas vehicles and then can move the same speed as marching cavalry. Oh, that's the beast cavalry, basically. Yeah, so launching an attack. And then we get into the actual rules of how you attack. You've got veteran, normal, and green. I think we'll just call everybody normal for the purposes of our first fight. And then, maybe we make the survivors veterans of this first fight, and everybody else is normal. So we can kind of ramp up the complexity of our game as we go. Every battalion has a strength of 15. All right? Maximum strength of 15. Support company adds 2 strength points, but never over 15. So the support company that you're dealing with, it really just gives you 2 more hit points to work with, right? And then depending on your strength, so we've got our veterans at a strength of 15. You roll 2d10 on the attack. And this is going to be roll some dice and compare the results. Our normal infantry, full strength, is going to roll a single d12. If you have heavy weapon support, if you've got those medium armor with you, you're going to add 2 to the roll. If you have tube artillery, here we go, then depending on who you're attacking, right, this could even be mortars, you're going to get a bonus. Infantry company added to a battalion will add 3 strength points. So again, on that second round of attack, that's where having those guys in play really helps out. For hasty attack, you can only have 1 stiffening, and then you do have reinforcement. So here we go. So here's the other modifiers, and this is where those modes that we talked about come into play. If you are in, let's see, troops doing an immediate counterattack are +1. Where's hasty attack? Oh, right, there isn't a modifier. If you're in hasty, either attack or defense, it's just a straight die roll. If you have taken the time to prepare your defense, and this will be the case for our fight, where the Auster-Regnums have taken a couple of days, we may even give them some strong points that they can defend. They're going to start the battle in prepared defense. So they're going to get +2 on all their combat rolls. Of course, the attackers, because they're advancing, they're not going to be able to go into a prepared attack unless they're prepared to weather some hasty attacks of their own, right? And then, of course, if you survive an attack and you want to do a counterattack, then you're going to be at +1, right? Let's see. And I think that's it. So then you check the winning margin. If it's a tie, nobody loses anything, fighting continues in the same place. I think that means you're stationary and you can convert to hasty attack if you're on the defense if you want to. Difference of 1, loser loses 1 strength point. Victor loses 1 on an odd number. So even if you win the combat, you can still take some losses. If the difference is, and then this kind of goes gradationally, right? With these additional types, on a difference of 16, the loser loses 7 strength points. That's at least half. And the victor will always lose 1 on an odd number. Oh, that's interesting. And that's just the straight up die roll. So it's basically a 50-50. But the real key to this is the losers are rolled back on a result B. So if the difference is 3 or more, the result is the losers are pushed back a formation depth. They lose any prepared defenses they were holding, but could use any defenses they're driven back onto. And on a C, this starts at a differential of 8 on the die roll. The attackers are victorious. If they're armor, mechanized, or cavalry, they break through, and they continue to move 1 on the other side. The attackers retain their mode. So that's if the attackers are victorious. If you're an attacker and you win by that much, you just plow on through. If the defenders win, then you throw the attackers back, and the attackers have to go into hasty defense. The attackers have to go into hasty defense because they're so demoralized. Now, bear in mind that these casualties are not necessarily, where we say the loss of strength points, that's not necessarily guys bleeding out on the field. That's a part of it, but it also represents things like initiative, courage, morale, which we get into there. And then when you are on, so stiffening units do not normally take casualties until the unit they're stiffening gets down to isolated company level, meaning you've got 15 strength points. And if you lose, I think it's like with every 3 points, you lose a company. Or is it when you're down to 0, then your companies are all isolated and they can't coordinate anymore, so they're effectively, that battalion is neutralized. And of course, we're going to be using up to 9 battalions at a time. There's one other formation that I should point out here, and that is, we talked about the 4x5 cards, but there's another way to do this where, and again, thanks, Jim, the organization here is a little bit wonky. You use a string. Man, where is it? When you are in defense, you deploy your battalion with a 120 centimeter long piece of string. That's a really big, think about this, on a 4x8 table, that's 4 feet long. But of course, at its widest, it's going to be about the size of this, right? There's 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's going to be about this big. And that's when you're on defense. You kind of organize your units inside that string. But that string shows the defensive perimeter that they're covering, both in terms of whether they've got a line of troops and then a ready reserve, ready to move up. So that's the whole area that you're going to be dealing with. So, and I think what we may wind up doing is just saying, okay, look, since that becomes this 120 centimeter, we go from 5 frontage to basically 30. For our little guys, our little half centimeter companies, or battalions, I should say, we'll make that a lot bigger, right? We'll do the same thing. We'll multiply it by, so we went from 5 to 30 by 6. So we'll actually drop a 3x3 centimeter area on the table, and that is what the guys are defending, whether it's hasty or prepared. The stiffening, like I said, the stiffening is your reserve battalion that can move up to replace losses and plug gaps in the line. And then I think I misspoke earlier. I think I said that we have melee, but you really don't in this case. Melee is just a normal attack. The only time you'd have missile fire is if you have artillery and counter artillery, breaking off of combat. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about here, so Jim provides fields. I'm looking at the word fields. He provides rules for minefields. Yeah, I'm not going to worry about that. Air power. This is something that we really need to spend some time thinking about. I'm not going to do that in this first fight. I'm going to assume in the first fight it's a 1v1. Both guys have one squadron of air power. We're not going to work. It just neutralizes each other. It's just complexity. The air battle will rage, and probably in our second fight or in the aftermath of this first fight, we can come back and take a look and do a full. I think this is a complicated enough subsystem. We can run a full game on air power that then gets translated down to the ground level, where whoever wins, effectively air power counts as a kind of off-board artillery. You treat it that, and that's how it's going to be used in the field, right? You call in airstrikes, and you don't really have to worry about range because planes can go really far, really fast. But you do have to worry about, well, who's got air superiority, and what kind of superiority do you have? There are rules for helicopters in here, and I don't really want to go into this too much. There are rules for airdrop. We may get into that in a future episode, but I really just wanted to lay out the situation, remind you guys where we're at, and just kind of show you how the rules work so that when I sit down and come up with a battlefield, you understand exactly where these guys are coming from. So I think that'll probably be our next episode. We'll sit down, we'll draw up a battlefield, and then from there, we can deploy our troops, both defensive. Of course, the defensive troops will be deployed in their prepared defenses, and then we'll figure out what's the best way to try to crack that nut with the Septemtrian relief force trying to save the silver. I mean, trying to protect the people that live there. That's what's really all about. So, hey, thanks for watching. Appreciate you coming along. I know we didn't really accomplish much today, but and this turned into more of a review of Hell in Microcosm. But this is an interesting scale of combat. I know the Hex Encounter guys are like, look at this noob. But I think a lot of the miniature guys are going to find this really interesting to kind of step back and just, I don't want to say invent the game as you go, because Jim has really done most of the heavy lifting for us, but to really put some time and effort into considering, well, how big of a battlefield do we need based on the troops that are approaching? And I think it's safe to say that the Hook Regiment, they're going to come down and they're going to wind up having to deploy, so what do we say? 2 centimeters is 25 kilometers. They're going to wind up deploying pretty far back from that. They could take the train down in a day and then unload in a day, and then by like the 5th, I don't know, the 14th or 15th, they're going to be ready to attack. Interestingly enough, the Beast Cavalry over here comes alive on the 12th. They can take the rail down here, and they should be able to zip up, as I said. But I think the key here is that because they waited till the 12th to leave, 13th, 14th, 15th, I think there may even be some reinforcements, and that may be where we fall back on our experience as wargamers to say, well, let's just consider what the probability is that these reinforcements from the south get there in time to make a difference. That may also depend on the air war, but I think we'll go ahead and just do, because this is so new, we're just going to do a straight 1v1 with the attackers having the objective to throw the defenders off the line here, off the railhead. And all the defenders are trying to do is maintain their position. And so we can go through those rules a little bit simpler. That's all I got for you today. Next time, we'll build a map of this tiny little area, and we'll set up and that may take us, we get to set up, and that may be done for us. If we have time to do the battle, we'll do the battle. Watch for it. Coming up, I don't know, week, maybe 2, hopefully not 3 weeks, because I want to know what happens next. Till then, I'm praying for you.